Okay, and then hide, hide loading meeting controls. All right, I mean, it's Berkeley time. I guess we can get started. Today's lecture is pretty short. It's just CSS animations. Oh, sheesh. Why isn't it? Oh, okay, yeah. You guys have probably seen something similar. Like low-key animations are like similar to transitions, except we'll see, it's like not the same. But yeah, with animations, we can create really nice dynamic websites with these cool little like things like floating up and things fading in. Yeah, and also you can do cool things like this, all with CSS. Yeah, basically the way you want to think of it is like you establish like states or like different, I guess, frames in which you want your like element to kind of like travel through. So basically like for this, for example, like we see that our circle is like moving left to right, but also there's some stuff in between. That's what animations are going to do. Yeah, CSS. So the thing we do or we use to make this happen is we have what's called like a keyframes block. In terms of like writing, the way you like set it up is pretty straightforward. You write this like little @ keyframes to tell CSS like we're going to do some animations, and then you write your name of whatever function you're trying to accomplish here. And then within that, you have your CSS role. So pretty similar to like what we've done before with like tags and classes or IDs and classes, but yes. Yes, okay. So there's two ways we can write our rules with animations. As I said before, we have like states. So you want to think of it as like what you start from and what you're going to. So for example, this function is called fade in. So as you can kind of guess, we're going to start with opacity 0. So it's like invisible, but then as our animation progresses, it'll go to opacity 1 and be fully visible. So that's one way to do it, using these words from and to, which is kind of like a more intuitive way of understanding it. But we can also use percentages. So think of it as like at 0% completion, we have like opacity 1. But at 50%, so like halfway through the animation, it'll be fully visible. And then at 100%, it'll be disappeared again, or it will disappear again. So that's kind of another way you can describe it. You don't have to use 0, 50, and 100. You can use like other numbers if you want, but this is like pretty standard. But yes. And then for example, up, down. So if we really kind of unpack what's happening here, at 0%, so our starting state, we have a top margin of 100 pixels. So whatever our element is, it'll be like pushed down, right? And then 50% or like halfway through our animation, it should come back up. And then when the animation completes, it'll be pushed back down. So that's kind of like a way to describe this. Yeah. So one cool thing, I mean, this is like something you can accomplish purely with CSS animations. And the idea that's kind of being illustrated on this slide here is if we use start and end to describe like this state right here on the left, we can see that this like figure and all the shapes are kind of higher up than when they are in our like mid state, I guess. So when you play out the animation once through, we can see that this character, this like all these elements here get pushed down and then come back up. There's definitely a lot more going on than just going down and up. As you can see, like other things are like rotating and moving, but don't worry about it. This is just kind of like high level illustration of what's going on. Yes. Okay, so are there any questions on what we covered so far? Okay, cool. Application. So animations on their own really like don't do anything. You have to apply them to certain like classes or IDs, right? So let's say we have like an ID of potato head, or we have some element like HTML element called potato head, and we want to animate it using our up down function. The way we do this is, well, we put it in the block, you know, styling our element, and we use animation name, and in this little section we call, or like we write the name of the function that we're trying to refer to. And we also indicate the duration. So how long do we want this animation to take place? Like, is it over 10 seconds? Do we want it to be really fast? Maybe 0.5 seconds. In this case, it's going to be a relatively fast animation. So the entire thing, it should bounce up and down, or down and up in like half a second. So it's kind of fast. Okay. Oh, but yeah, that's what this is kind of doing. I think it's not really a great illustration, but let's just move on. So the two properties you need to have whenever you're using your animations this way is the name and duration, right? Which kind of makes sense. We need to tell the code like what animation are we doing and like for how long. That's like that's like the minimum name and duration. But there are also optional adjustments to kind of like refine this. So the first one we'll go over is what's called like a speed curve. I don't know. I mean, you guys might be familiar with this idea, but like instead of having like a constant speed all the way through, sometimes you want things to maybe like start slow, but like speed up halfway through, kind of like a speed ramp, or the opposite, right? Start fast and then kind of like slow down. So there are like different ways we can specify this. So animation timing function, and here are all the different things you can do. So if we just take a look at like an easy one, let's look at ease and quad, right? I'm pretty sure what's going to happen is it'll start slow and then like speed up halfway through. So that's cool. We can also use like other functions like cubic, where it starts slow, like speeds up and then slows down. But yeah, there's a lot of options out here. Loki, I don't know why you'd need more than like 3, but yeah, we have a lot to pick from. Yeah, so play around with that. We also have delay. So these animations will happen like automatically. So unlike, I think you guys have done hover, or maybe I think hover is one that you guys have used for a transition. You know, you have to like actually hover your cursor around to like trigger the thing. Animations just like happen on their own. So sometimes you don't want it to like happen immediately. So you can apply a delay to this to indicate like how much time passes before it happens. In this case, we want it to happen instantaneously. So yeah, we just say 0 seconds. There's also like a play number. So we can use animation iteration count. So if we wanted to like run the animation twice, we could say 2. But you might be thinking like, what if I want it to happen like continuously and never stop? You can also specify, I think there's like infinite, you can write infinite, and then it'll just keep looping through essentially. So that's what this is for, if you don't just want it to run once and then stop. And then there's also direction. And this will basically, you can either go like, I guess reverse basically means that you're starting from like the end frame and you move to the beginning frame. But that's the idea. Also, just like general practice, whenever you have, like for CSS, if you're not sure like what words to put here, like ease in, or like what your options are, you can always just look it up. Like literally just look up CSS animation timing function, and then it'll give you like all the options and like describe it. Yeah, so there's a lot of documentation online for any of these. So typical like front end practices is you don't have to really memorize a lot. You just like know how to Google it. So yes. Oh, there's also a way you can like put it all together rather than having this like stacked. And this can get a little messy. If you remember that this is the order, name, duration, speed curve, etc., you can just all put it in animation in like, and just indicate each value. And this will do the same thing as this. It's just like nice from the eyes. Yeah, okay. Oh yeah, and then one thing is if you want, let's say, what's like a practical example? Oh, let's say like upon loading, you want your website to like have this like text box that like shoots in from the side, right? But you don't want it to like, after it shoots in, like to disappear. What happens is you can like have it stop in its final state so that wherever it ends up, it stays. And basically you just use animation fill mode forwards for that. I can't really think of use cases for like the other ones, but yeah, this might come in handy. Yeah, so as we kind of like briefly touched on in the beginning, so we have like transitions where we use like pseudo selectors, and this is mainly used to respond to a user's action. And yeah, we have like properties to determine like other things like states or speed curves. And the example that we used was actually like hover. Oops, let me go back. Whereas animations are kind of, they just like keep going and will happen automatically. And it, again, the important thing here is it doesn't depend on a user state. It's just like almost running in the background. But yes. Okay, we're like low key, like at the end. Let's do a demo. Okay, cool. Can you guys see this? Okay, cool. Where's the shadow at? Yo, this is hella jank. Hold on. There's supposed to be a shadow. Let's see what's going on, man. I can't scroll. Anyway, oh, sick. Okay, cool. So yeah, so let's like look at this animation for a little bit and like think like what's happening here. Okay. Let's just take a bit of time to figure out what's going on. I'll give you a hint. There's zero JavaScript. If I open the JavaScript, there's like nothing in there. So this is all done in CSS. And don't cheat. Don't look at the CSS. Don't look at it. Okay. How do I hide this? Can I just hide it? Okay. So hopefully you should recognize that there's two like main HTML elements here. There's only the pumpkin and a shadow, right? And the pumpkin's like going up and down. The shadows are getting bigger and smaller. Maybe you can see the connection to what we just learned, but basically we have defined two functions here. It's really small. I'm sorry. Can I make this bigger? Sure, that works. We have like a bounce animation, and we're using the from and to method here. Basically starting it. Oh, this is new. But yeah, basically it's just defining like it's bouncing, it's going up and down. And I'm pretty sure this is looped. I wonder if it has, I didn't really take a look at this. Oh, infinite, perfect. So this is what we have here. Because we don't want it to just like bounce and then stop. We've indicated that because we want this animation to just keep going, we have infinite. There's one thing we didn't touch on, I think, which is this last property. Alternate basically makes it so that when it like stops, it like, yeah, it just kind of like bounces back and forth. You can like try it on your own. And then the other function we have is like shadow size. So this will control kind of like the growing and shrinking of the size of like our shadow. I mean, really, this can be applied to any element if you want it to shrink and grow. But this one's a little more easy to understand. We start from, oh, they're using percents here. Cool. Basically, we have it to be the full scale. So however big it was indicated to be, and then at 100%. So at the end of the animation, it shrinks. So I'm pretty sure this should also be infinite and alternate. Yeah. Okay. One last thing to point out with this animation is that you can see that the pumpkin is like, it is like following how you'd imagine something to bounce, even though a pumpkin shouldn't bounce like that. But like the idea is, even though it's like moving in a linear fashion, you can see that they're probably applying some speed curve so that it's like, how do I even explain it? It's hard to explain, but you can see at some points it's going like slower, but then it speeds up and then like slows down again. So that's kind of like the more practical application of like a speed curve. So all of those concepts we just learned put into a single fun, quirky animation. Yeah, let me go back to the slides for, okay. Oh shoot, my bad. Yeah, what else? Questions? Do we have any questions? Yeah, what's up?
So for the keyframes property, like when it is like 0%, when it's like 100%.
Oh, when is it at 0%? So the start of the animation would be 0%. So like if you indicated like no delay, like as soon as it loads, it's pretty much gonna like start at that point. So maybe if you want something to start like off the window and then like slide in, maybe you want to like at 0% have its like right margin, or sorry, left margin like 500 pixels if we're using pixels, for example, right? So that would be like your 0%. That's where it starts. And then obviously everything in between 0 and 100, which I think it still has to be like an integer. Yeah, anything between 0 and 100 will like indicate where in the timeline of the animation a certain state is. Yeah. So I don't really know why you'd ever need to specify anything besides 0, 50, and 100, but if you really want to, you could. If you want like multiple checkpoints. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh yeah, so I wonder if I can actually like change the code here. So duration just specifies like the time it takes to complete one cycle of the animation. We're back to the pumpkin. So in this case, it's basically saying like it takes 0.5, wait, is this right? Yeah, 0.5 seconds to bounce. But let's say we want to make this like a slower thing. I hope this actually works. Can I run the code? Yo, that's crazy. Okay, so you can see it's like taking now, it's hard, it's not really clearly defined what the start and end is, but like whatever it is, I'm slowing it down. Dude, that's crazy. So, but that's basically what it is. It'll take like 10 seconds now to complete the entire animation. Yeah, does that make sense? I wonder what happens if you put 0. Does it just like break? Yeah, it just doesn't do anything. Dude, wait, I want to try this. Okay, anyway. All right, back to point 5. Any other questions? Yeah, okay. Otherwise, that's it for animations. Yeah. We'll move to Kelly's design.
All right, so we're going to be going over motion, flow, and aesthetic for today. Essentially, we're going to be touching up on what Evan just taught, animations like CSS, or if you have like a GIF maybe. And yeah, we'll just be going through this. So essentially motion and flow just refers to like how animations kind of move. You know, how you saw him control how the pumpkin was moving like really slow or really fast. So essentially there's a lot of like, I guess, conceptual or like not right or wrong ways, but there's some more, I guess, standard practices that you can kind of follow when you're trying to make something move in a certain pattern. So here's an example of a little like PayPal receipt animation. And I would really like if y'all could like tell me some things that you see about this receipt. Like, do you think this animation is good? Like, what don't you like about it, etc. You can just, if you want to raise your hand or if you want to just say it, that's chill. That's all right. Mhm.
But also, like, I guess it's also kind of in the past. So I think they're kind of small with that, with the prices are not my
Mhm. Yeah, so you bring up a lot of good points in that. So basically in this animation, while it may look really clean at first and it's like, I think aesthetically kind of visualizing like it looks fine. However, the animation is fairly quick, yet it takes like 3 to 4 seconds just to load the items on the receipt, but it doesn't stay for very long. It stays there for maybe like a second or two and then it fades away, which kind of defeats the purpose of using an animation to show this receipt. If you're getting a receipt, you want to see what's on there, like read through it, and in this animation kind of just disappears. So that's not necessarily what we want in animation, even though the aesthetic and design of this may be fine. And she also brings up another good point of just like color theories we touched upon a few weeks ago, making sure that each like item and the color contrast is legible, even from like a far away. So here is a kind of like a better example of an animation. So while like it's kind of quicker, like you can see it changes pretty quickly. This is more something like an instant animation where it's like a little notification, like it's sending code, it's sent, and now we're it says like we sent a text message to like a number, right? So this is a good example of when you should use an animation. So for like the receipt, in this case, I would say it's not very necessary to use an animation to do all this fancy stuff. While it may look cool, it's not very practical and there's no need for that. Whereas in this case, you have the little loading bar, you have the sent check mark, and then it shows you like, oh, now you should have received a text message. So it's kind of more interactive in a sense that is more has like a greater purpose. And it's not just, I guess, like the only purpose is to like look nice. And so as I was saying, animation should not be the main attraction, but rather using it for loading screens, loading bar, assisting with user experience, or just expressing ideas. So just make sure when you are using animations, as cool as they can be, you don't want to overuse it because then that just takes away the whole point. And you want to focus more on the content itself. Let the view animation speak for itself. And when it's in the right place, then in this case, you can see it's done really well, very simple. And this is just a basic wireframe, but even so, the animation is just a little simple, you know, pop up. Here is an example where an animation would be very useful. So currently we're changing between 2-3 pages, but the drastic change between pages kind of seems jarring and it's hard to like, I guess, focus. So a way to use animations is essentially kind of like move the pictures in a way that when you're changing pages, it kind of loads in a more user-friendly way. And it's easier in the eyes so that like we as humans, we can see the change happen when we go to a different page. And aesthetically also, I feel like it looks better. So even though the animation, this is a little bit like there's like maybe a lot happening, it's done in a purposeful way that is used to make it easier on the eyes rather like going like this to this. And so a good like I guess app or website to use when you're trying to figure out like, oh, how should I make this animation is InSpace. So it's a really great just application to use when you want to make a basic wireframe. So something people kind of forget about animations is like, oh, sometimes you just want to add it on after. But honestly, when you're trying to plan out a website, you should be trying to include that animation from the forefront. When you're creating your wireframe, as you did probably for your midterm Figma mockup, while you guys didn't make any animations for this midterm, like in the future, if you ever wanted to add an animation to any of your projects, a good way to approach it would be to start thinking about the animation right from the start when creating that website. So that way it's included in your wireframe, you know, like, oh, this is the purpose of this certain animation. I'm gonna have to switch pages. So let's do a loading bar and like, here's a way I can do it. And I think it's a good way to keep your components, like your animated components structured in a purposeful way. And also like, I guess, keeps the flow of your website a little more cohesive. Adobe After Effects, some of you guys may have used this as well, just for like video editing or like post-production, but this is also used for just creating animations. I will say Adobe, you have to pay, but if you're a Berkeley student, then you get it for free. So, yeah. So for aesthetic, let's bring together what we've learned so far, just like from the past few weeks of design. Let's go over like branding. What are some things we know that kind of like you think of when you think of a brand? Participation is very welcome. Yeah, that's actually really awesome. That basically touched most of the points. So one of the first things that we covered was like color theory. And so a color scheme is really important for a brand just to establish themselves. When you think of like, let's say like Chase or like Zoom, you think of that like blue color and they're very much associated with that and they use that color scheme really well. When you think of like maybe Robinhood, they use that green color very often. Typography, just fonts in general, they play a purpose in each brand on how they want to like portray themselves. If they're more youthful, maybe more corporate, choosing the right font is really important for their brands. Another thing is images and graphics. If they're more fun and bold, they will use more bold like images and graphics. And then layout, as we discussed, is really important on like how kind of a brand structures like their websites. And what we just learned today, motion. Motion is really important on how all of these like components play together. So now let's tie this to an actual phrase like brand personality theory. If you guys have never heard of this, essentially brand personality theory kind of associates a brand with character traits that you may perceive with like a human maybe. So for example, let's think of like Chanel. It's like a luxury brand. You associate it with very like, I guess, when I think of it, I think it's very like luxury, high class. It's kind of targets a certain audience that like maybe middle to upper class. And I guess a character trait I would associate with them would be like sophisticated. They have very clean, timeless, like I guess purses. And that's something that people associate with Chanel. And this plays into like any brand. You can relate that to any brand. And they have certain character traits that they use. And they want to essentially build and associate their brand with a certain character trait that maybe people of a certain specific audience has. And therefore it relates the consumer to the brand and it increases their brand equity. So here are some examples. So Stripe is, I'm just gonna go out so you guys can see the actual website because I think it's really cool. Essentially Stripe is like software stuff, uses APIs. And as you scroll down, notice how the animations kind of change, but they're very subtle. Like right here, as you can tell, it's changed really not like, I guess, in your face. Like it's not the main attraction, but it does a good part of showing what they can do. And as you scroll, there are like little more animations, but it's not necessarily the main focal point. And for Stripe, they have a very like blue, like purpley kind of color scheme that with a like sans serif font. And I guess all of these together, like I think I associate very heavily with Stripe, and they can do a good part of putting all these components together and making their homepage cohesive. And so let's do another example. So Robinhood, many guys are probably more familiar with Robinhood. It's like an investing app, and their main color is like green. It's dark green, and they have a very simple animation on their front page. It's just like the phone's moving, which is kind of cool. And they use different, basically like variations of the green. But see how the flow of this, it's not just like vertical, but they also have like a horizontal kind of carousel scrolling here, which is kind of cool. So that way it's not just like you scroll one way, you kind of scroll both ways. And as you keep going, there's like mini animations that aren't necessarily like what you draw your attention to, but it's there. And I think it does, Robinhood does a good job of it. And so let's go some more examples. Zoom, I think all of us have used Zoom at this point. They're very corporate, like it's not as fun as maybe Robinhood or Stripe, but when you think of Zoom, you don't think of like fun times, I guess. Like Zoom presents themselves in a way that is very fitting of what their brand is, and it's essentially like a video like platform for you guys to like have classes or maybe chat with people. But like mostly when you think of Zoom, you think of like, oh, have to log on to Zoom for class today. So as you can tell, like as you scroll, they keep this like very like neutral, like white, gray kind of color scheme with like pops of blue for their logo. But it's still overall like just giving very corporate energy. It's not very fun, but that's not what they're not trying to sell you something that's fun necessarily. But Zoom keeps with this like kind of persona. It's very corporate. Yeah. Whereas like Discord, it still utilizes blue, but Discord is also like a place where you can like talk with friends, like chat, but it's much more of like a social thing versus something that you associate with classes. And they have much more bold graphics, as we talked about last week. And as you scroll, they have like little pop-up animations, just like a scrolling one, just displaying. While it's like their website is like very simple, I think Discord does a good job of combining kind of like this like very fun font that I feel like is not very common in maybe like Zoom wouldn't use this kind of thing. But for Discord, it works for them because their audience is like people our age. And our purpose isn't necessarily to like hold class, rather like, I don't know, stream League, I guess. But yeah, that's Discord. Vogue, it's very editorial, very like high fashion. It's very clean. When you look at Vogue, it's definitely like their focal point is on the images, whereas for Discord or maybe Zoom, like they have much more like information and like graphics. I think Vogue focus heavily on images, and they use like a very serif, their like Vogue font, I feel like is very particular to Vogue, and you don't really see Vogue in another font. So they've done a really good job branding themselves as that. And as you can tell, as you scroll, like there's just more photos. It's very editorial. Elle is another example of like a fashion magazine, but it's like Vogue, but a little more blog style, I guess. Their focal point is still a lot of pictures, and they still use that serif font. It's a lot of black and white that you see in a lot of fashion magazines, but in a way it's a little more, I guess, accessible than Vogue. Vogue feels a lot more like high fashion, whereas Elle is a little bit, I guess, it spans more. But yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of like the motion aesthetics and like animation design part. So are there any questions? If not, Let me stop recording real quick.